Network Automation Nerds podcast. Hi guys, this is Eric Cho. I hope you're having a fantastic day. I want to let you know this episode was originally a guest speaking session with Danny at our Network Automation Learning community for his thoughts about the recently concluded AutoCon0 conference. It is presented here in its original length of 1 hour, so a bit longer than the normal episodes. You would also hear other members' voices in the Q&A session toward the end. If you find it useful and are interested in joining our next guest speaking session, you could sign up via community-signup.networkautomation.community. The link is also in the show notes. Now, back to the show. So, without further ado, thanks for agreeing to be here, Dan.
Yeah, no, thank you for inviting me. And I appreciate being here.
No, I mean, this is not the first time. I mean, first time you being a guest speaker, but this is not the first time we would talk for sure. And you're not the first time we have a conversation about network automation, is it?
Right. No, not at all.
Yeah. So what do you like? How did you hear about the event?
Yeah. So I'll try to erase as many acronyms as possible. So
yes, please.
The blog article is NAF AutoCon0.
Yeah.
Is Network Automation Forum. I believe I first saw them on LinkedIn. I think that's where their presence, I saw their presence first.
Yeah.
So, it definitely piqued my interest, but, as you know, Eric, there are a lot of resources for network automation. So I wasn't sure exactly the purpose of it,
right.
Whether it was a conference, whether it's training, or a mix. And so I kind of I followed their page and kind of sat back and, weeks went by and started noticing they were getting a lot of sponsorships.
Right.
So
you're like, how do I fill out that expense report, right?
Right.
Is it training?
Right. Yeah. So I was just trying to figure out what's going on here, because the motto is it's on their website, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But basically,
let me pull out their website.
Yeah, it's right there. Why haven't we seen full adoption of network automation yet?
Mm-hmm.
Which I thought, I was that's a question I think everyone asks that's in network automation. Why aren't we seeing? We're seeing change, but we're not really seeing full adoption. So I thought it was an interesting, motto tagline. So I followed them and saw more as the program, it seemed like their followers were growing. They had more sponsors. Then I just decided, I was like, well, this could, this technically would be like a Cisco Live equivalent to a conference, right? An industry conference. So, that's when I decided to go.
But do you want to define full adoption of network automation, or because, I mean,
yeah,
because that's written up in your blog post too, right?
Right. Yeah. So network, I would say adoption would be operationalizing it. Right.
Okay.
So I'll kind of expand from there. So operationalizing would be replacing existing processes with new automated focused ones, right? Doesn't mean it replaces everything, but for example, if you need to update the software on your network devices, and you have two guys on the team that might know Ansible or Python, and they have a couple scripts that work here and there, that's not really adoption. Adoption would be, you go through the change process, and your implementation plan doesn't include, hey, we copy this to Flash, we do that. We rely on this automated process, this system. And then obviously, depending on the change management, they may want to know the technicalities of it, but you're more or less pointing it to, hey, we have an automation system, not just a one-off script on someone's laptop.
Yeah.
That's.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty good way of coming in from an operator, right? Because I think the vendors, depending on what they're selling, they also have different definition on adoption, right? A lot of vendors sells this one size fits all, or they try to treat your whole network as a uniform fabric. and they don't care, which part gets taken out and put it in. And that is a very different picture when you say like adopt that versus just like operationalize.
Yeah, I like to use the operationalizing as a good example, just because ops is kind of where everyone starts most of the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
You don't normally just get thrown in from your CCNA into an architect role. So
Well, some do, but
so yeah,
rarely works out.
right. But yeah, everyone starts in ops. So I like to use that example. But no, this automation, there, network automation is just a small subsector of infrastructure automation, right? So we won't get into all that, but in network automation, you have the operation side. We have observability. There's other sectors, I'll call them, within network automation that you definitely can create examples. Observability, there was a whole panel, and we could talk about that, but there was a whole panel at this conference that literally just talked about observability, and thinking about streaming telemetry and moving off of SNMP, right, and that whole conversation. So that in itself, right, is its own, technically could be looked at as adoption of automation. So there's just so many different pieces with automation. It's tough to just have a blanket statement like that. But
Yeah.
I hope the point is, I hope it just, if you're listening, that one of those examples makes sense. But that's why I like to start with operations, because I think a lot of people can understand that.
Yeah, and I think Eddie also mentioned in the chat that what grabbed his attention initially was network, right? Like there's a lot of conferences out there, but rarely there's one that's just networking focused. I mean, set aside like Networker or Cisco Live, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I guess that might be a good segue into start just like talking about the conference itself.
Of course. Yeah, go for it.
So, and then, kind of starting off with, the highlight section of my
Yeah.
blog, like there were vendors, and, I mentioned sponsors. There were sponsors of the event, and they had little booths set up, a couple of tables here and there. I don't know how many there were total. I think I read somewhere in the 20s, 24, 26.
Yeah, it seems like they have different tiers. So on the website, if I scroll it down right here, so there's, iTential, there's Backbox, which I've never heard of, but certainly, IP Fabric, Juniper, Selector, Infinera, Kentic, Netbox Labs, Network to Code, people or companies that you've heard of, and of course Arista, which I think you'll go into too, right?
Right. Yep. So, yeah, and in my blog, I mentioned a couple of those vendors, and I stopped by a few of their setups, but I just mentioned a couple.
Sure.
Specifically, starting off like Arista, I mentioned because I have a good friend, Julio Perez, works there.
Julio.
Yeah, right. You know Julio as well. So yeah, it was interesting from that perspective, though, right? With the vendors being there, because unlike larger conferences, other tech conferences where they're just trying to sell you a product,
Yeah.
the conversations that I overheard and were a part of while I was out there, they were more constructive, is the best way I could describe them. It was like, what problems are you seeing? And some of them were just in general conversations about automation. It wasn't like, hey, this product, you should get my product because XYZ. It was just, well, what problems are you having? Oh, have you thought about this? Have you tried this? It was really just like a technology driven conversation versus product driven. So it was nice. It was kind of refreshing, I guess is the best way to put it, to not be flooded with marketing emails and, hey, you should buy this product because of this. It was just, this is what our product does. Take a test drive if you want, or if you want me to, kind of go into details or 10,000 foot view, let me know. So definitely, shout out to the sponsors. I think all their people did a great job kind of explaining their products without being too salesy.
Yeah, and I think Keith also mentioned, Keith, who works for Juniper, in the chat, that Juniper. So, yeah, kudos, man. I mean, we'll probably, like, when we open up the audio session later on, we'll probably have a couple of minutes for his thoughts as well. But yeah, thanks for all the sponsors. Like, it can't happen without them. So I'm glad to hear that there are not a lot of marketing and not a lot of like fluffs, right? So people who are there probably are more very tech focused, as you mentioned.
Right. Yeah. So I'll quickly just touch on some of um, the sponsors that I mentioned in the blog post. So Arista, as I mentioned, was there. They had a demo with their AVD product.
Hmm.
So using Ansible, able to deploy a validated design. Um, and then I also got to talk with Julio about their a network test automation framework they have called ANTA.
Hmm. Is that like a similar to PyATS, or what's your take on it?
So I don't really have a take yet.
Okay.
He put me the documentation, and I promised him that I would take a look at it. Um, but it seems very easy to like a low entry barrier
Yeah.
to getting started. He showed me some of the documentation, so I did promise him I'll take a look at that because network test automation that's what I'm been enjoyed doing currently. So yeah, so that was Arista. They just, but like I said, it was very casual in a way to where you could walk up, see a demo, talk to Julio, talk to Daniel as well. He was there, his coworker,
Hmm.
to where they could go through a demo, ask about their products, and so forth. Yeah, the next one you have up here, Nokia. Nokia keeps crushing it. I mean, there's really nothing else to say. Like Nokia, they had Container Lab. They
Sure.
showed the ins and outs of Container Lab. If you haven't heard of Container Lab, please check it out. Um, it is one of the easiest tools. It's so refreshing to see. You could basically simulate a network just with containers, and there are a lot of possibilities with it. So they went through, showed Container Lab. They talked about it, at their booth. They also talked on stage. Actually, they had a representative from Nokia on stage. Talked about they have um, an AI. It's like a Chat GPT,
Yeah.
SR Linux GPT,
Yeah.
and so basically you can ask. It's built into the software. You can install it in SR Linux, and you can ask almost like a Chat GPT interface. You could say in plain English, like ask AI, how many BGP neighbors do I have? Are all my BGP neighbor relationships healthy or stable? So some things that those are very easy examples, right? They also showed an example of if I wanted to configure BGP with 4 neighbors with these IPs, how would I do that? And it would print out, your configuration for you and show you how to do it. It was
Wait,
pretty cool.
where do you install the SRL GPT? Do you install it on the host machine that's running these containers, or
Correct.
do
Yeah.
you install them inside of the container?
Yes, on the device. So in the context of Container Lab, yeah, if you had SR Linux, I I'm assuming it works in their containerized image. But
Hmm.
yes, it's on the device.
Oh, okay. So like on the host machine, so it has visibility into the connections and so on, or
Correct. Yeah. So on the
okay.
router, on the switch, if it's in a container, in the container,
Hmm.
don't hold me to the container piece, but I believe actually what they showed on stage.
Okay.
But
Okay.
anyways, yeah,
Well,
it's
we'll
right
we'll
there.
have more information probably because this is still experimental, but I
Correct.
imagine
Yeah.
if you need like visibility into the connections between different hosts, then they have to have that like that macro level.
Yeah. The interesting play I saw with it was, you hear about LLMs,
Yep.
these language models, and they basically were saying like the difference between this SR Linux GPT and Chat GPT is, Chat GPT uses the internet's history essentially up to
Yep.
2021 or 22, right?
Yep.
Whereas I guess theirs uses their own language model that's very network focused, right?
Mm.
So you might be able to get some. It has additional context that maybe a Chat GPT wouldn't.
Yep.
Um, that's at least the way I took it.
Hmm.
So, but yeah, so it was pretty cool. It was neat. It was a nice little demo for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there are going to be more use cases that comes out of it, but But definitely you want to have some kind of intercept, right? Like there's you know, a very famous example of like 2 plus 2 on, on ChatGPT proper and they were, like OpenAI, and they would just like fall on their face, right? But,
Hmm.
just
Right.
because it's like, and also like the accuracy decreases over time because they're taking in so much more data and that includes both good and junk. So that, initially they might be able to figure out, if enough text out there have 2 to the power of 2 to be 4, then that's great. Then I'll win out. But if enough like people who are putting in junk like 2 to the power of 2 equals to 8 or 16 or whatever, then eventually those data will win out, right? There's no intervention. So this seems like Nokia is intercepting like the request, and they try to answer it themselves first, or at least construct a prompt that get back into an answer that's underneath them that has a lot of chat GPT, but the key information is networking and
Right.
Nokia.
Right. Yeah, I'll be interested to see where it goes. They did mention multiple times it's experimental.
Yeah.
Like it's basically a pet project up to this point. So don't ask your sales rep for unless you want just a demo environment. And it's not like they're recommending to push it to all your Nokia devices yet. So,
No,
but very
or like
cool.
rely on your like change management.
Right. Right. Yes, and so I think the last vendor that sponsor that I mentioned here is OpsMill. So
Yeah.
OpsMill's it's a new company. It's founded by Damien Garris and Raphael. I'm gonna probably butcher it. Manier.
That's how I would pronounce it too. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I've met Damien and have a history with Damien. So I saw him. I think the first day I was there. And he kind of showed me around Ops Mill and his kind of the thought with it. So I will probably lose you explaining the product, but basically what it is that it allows you to. Um, so when you think of a source of truth, right? You think of a netbox, an Autobot. Those are kind of the two big players, and that's where you store all of your kind of declared state or like your intended state of the network or connections or IP addresses and so forth, right? And but under the hood, that's just a relational database, right? And what OpsMill is trying to do is allows you to, if there's any sort of reason that you have to change your data schema to the database or that underlying quote unquote source of truth, then the data changes go with your code and your changes. So it's very heavily integrated with Git.
Yeah.
So I'll kind of spin it to, if you've ever contributed to a project on GitHub, you create a pull request, right? It has all your code changes in it. And then it goes through some CI testing and so forth. But what this allows you to do, this product, it allows you to the database can actually branch just like you do in Git, right? You create a branch, do your changes, and then you create a pull request to merge your changes. This is basically a database that allows you to branch the database with your code changes, and then also create a pull request and include those database changes as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um,
I actually just talked to Damien on like prior to jumping out like an hour ago, and just specifically focus on ops. It is very cool.
Perfect. Well, then what I would say is if you ever do a recording with him, go to that recording, and I'm sure Damien can explain it way better.
I don't think I could edit that fast enough, but yeah, it's yeah, recorded a session with him, and he talked about just as what you were saying, Danny, on the challenges that he see, and I of course like Eddie's here on the chat, and he created this tool in AA, which we released those episodes a couple of weeks ago, and relies on and he wrote about it, right, like on the Git on the back end. So I think there's definitely pros and cons on the two different approaches, and something that he probably mentioned in the conversation, but you haven't written it down here, was uses a graph database as opposed to like a relational database because
Right.
of that challenge you mentioned of you have to predetermine the relationships between entities, and it's kind of hard to do that ahead of time if the relationship is dynamic, right? Like if it's super easy if you have two data centers in this region and each data center has 500 devices and each device are this type of device and that type of device, but it's hard to capture the metadata on say a network design, right? Like through several iterations where you have some people put in their reviews and some people are um, you know uh, swapping out this and then coming up with a decision on 64 uplinks versus 32 or something like that. You could capture that 32 end result, but you can't capture the reasoning behind it, essentially the discussion up to that point, right? So then the next person comes in and say, oh, 32, that's great, but they don't know the why behind, like, or the months long discussion on why that is the number they picked.
That's that is a better explanation than what I just gave. So yes, that
No, no,
yes,
no, yeah,
absolutely. No,
yeah.
seriously, that was yeah, I definitely missed that in the blog post. Is yeah, the if you've never heard of graph databases, I recommend taking a look and googling around and seeing the power of graph databases. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I've heard of GraphQL, but I never heard of Graph Database. I didn't know it was already, kind of productized in a lot of open source project. I've heard of, NoSQL, and I've used a lot of them. I use SQL, but it seems like a very interesting movement and something
Yeah.
that Damien mentioned. And I'm sorry to cut you off, but something that mentioned like really strongly about was like every once in a while, us network engineers should like peek out from our look up from our like without burying ourselves in the screen and look up and look at other industries, right? Like other people have solved this before, and we should like take the good parts out from their struggle or their wisdom and apply to network engineering.
Yeah, that's exactly that. I would say is the theme of network automation, and what will get us to the next level is exactly what you just said: is look across different industries, specifically software development,
Hmm.
and they've been doing what we're like experimenting with for years. For example, CI/CD, right? It's a very crazy acronym for some, and it's very buzzwordy in the network industry. But you look across software development, that's a tool in their tools, in their toolbox. So yeah, we definitely need to look across, other industries.
Yeah, but the challenge then I posed to him in the section, right? Like my little plug is it's so hard. Like we're already overwhelmed with our daily jobs and family and trying to it's hard enough to keep above water, let alone like go into a whole new different vertical where we know nothing about or very little about. And you feel like you're wasting time, right? Because you're not at the level that other people are. It's like me going to like a data science conference, right? Like I feel like I'm not being productive because I'm so far away from understanding what they're talking about. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I mean yeah, it's the nerves whenever the nerves you get whenever you're learning something new, but you don't feel like it's applicable to you. If that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from, but I think there also needs to be kind of a paradigm shift in networking, right? I think I forget who mentioned it. Actually, it was kind of a repeating phrase, and you've probably have heard of it as well. It's, the net. You have to start treating the network and the network devices as cattle instead of your pets.
Sure. Sure. I
And
think it was
so
the organizer who kept on, oh no, not no, oh, it's no, I mean it's the
I know.
Alex Henthron Iwan, I think. That's that he first came out with it. And I only know because I'm scheduled to record that session with him this afternoon.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
So perfect example, right? And that's kind of that. Like obviously, that you could take that a couple different ways, but the way I look at it is you kind of just have to treat the network at the end of the day is just data,
Yeah.
right? So what we do with that data, how we collect it, how we push configuration, how we get that full that feedback loop. There's many ways to do it. but we need to start looking at the network as data and not as basically artwork, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Like you back into that cattle versus pet, right? You babysit your pets when you go on vacation, you check into a hotel, but in cattle it's just like any other uniform transactional thing that you do on a daily basis.
right. Yeah. I mean, it's yeah, we just have to look at it differently to where it's, you may, and I haven't really run into this professionally, but you hear stories about people that it might be a senior architect or someone that's just been there a while, and it's like, oh, hey, I configured BGP for the network, or I did that, or I did this, and it's like, it's cool. Like, I'm glad like you had the thought and the design, and like it is a really good design, but the implementation steps shouldn't be anything to talk or kind of flex about, if that makes sense, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it shouldn't matter how the device gets configured, or the tiny little configuration options that you went through and hand jammed. It's good to have a good intended design. I think you do need to implement those nerd knobs when necessary, but I don't think we need to worry about how the device is configured and then how we validate the network. I think that's something that we should kind of have an open approach to and understand that, okay, we have a bunch of data from the network. Let's figure out what the network's doing, the intended state, and then how we need to get there. And that's where a lot of programming and Ansible and things that, we're talking about constantly in network automation, these are tools that help enable that.
Yeah, I think that goes back to what you were talking about in your conversation with Damien, right? Because those design process were not captured, so those often lived inside of these people who came up with it in the first place, uh, mind, or like maybe in the wiki or whatnot that nobody reads. So that becomes a unique snowflake process that others, even for a motivated individual, cannot understand, and that becomes like this treasure that lives inside. But if you can capture somehow, in that, reviews and everybody who had inputs, at least as a newcomer, right? I just joined the company yesterday, and I'm able to read all the documentation. And as a smart, motivated individual, I could contribute to that. Versus I have to go back to that person and buy him a beer or whatever and dig that out in the show.
Right. No, that's exactly right. And funny enough, that kind of puts us into this next section, people and processes, kind of leads right into it.
Right.
Um, so yeah, so people and processes. I wrote about a couple of the speakers there. I won't go through each of the individual presentations. There'll be, I believe, they said NAF, the leaders of NAF, are going to post the YouTube recording or recordings to YouTube,
Mm-hmm.
so that way everyone can take a look at all the different speakers and whatnot. Obviously, the one that highlighted in my eyes was Jeremy Schulman.
Okay.
He had a really good presentation about basically a design-driven approach
Yep.
to network assurance, and so what that means is not just taking in network design and configuring devices, but also based on the design, dynamically creating test and validation points to make sure the network looks and appears as it should. And we're not talking just like, hey, does the CPU and memory look good? Does the control plane look good? It's everything down to the cabling. Are we seeing transceiver, the light levels look good? And it was very in depth. And I mentioned, I put a link to his. He had a presentation for Nanog
Mm-hmm.
that kind of talked about. I think it was more theory, but the presentation he had for NAF was very demo driven. So it was really cool to see his tools and what he's built for the MLB.
Sorry. I mean, I didn't mean to get that, but yeah. So the link is in Danny's write up.
Right. Yep. So I mean, so his was good. Another one that I don't believe I included, but I would recommend checking out as well as Jason Davis. He works at Cisco.
Okay.
He
Oh,
has
is it the one who launches the Cisco Live like units and the network inside
Yep.
of a closed loop system?
Yep. Yeah. So he has a pretty big focus on observability and
Hmm.
telemetry. He's built some really cool dashboards, and yeah, he's probably the most famous for the knock dashboards, the Cisco Live knock dashboards that he's created and kind of presented at Cisco Live on. So his presentation was really cool, and I would recommend that that one as well. Um,
Nice.
but yeah, the presentations, I definitely don't want to take any steam away from the people that presented. Just go check them out whenever the recordings are released, and I think you'll enjoy. There really wasn't one that I would say, oh, like it's just kind of a repeat or it's something you always hear. Everyone had either a different take on how they're deploying automation in an enterprise. So I believe I mentioned Kaon
Yep.
from the Times. He deploys the way they use Ansible and deploy network automation. His company was different than. I don't know if I wrote. He works for 1111 Systems. I think it was Garrett Nowak. I think it was Garrett. He for 1111 Systems. He explained how they, in a year or year and a half, I believe, tried doing a transformation or completed a transformation to automation. But the theme I thought that was interesting across the board was, they said they've implemented network automation, but they're not locked out of the CLI, right? They kind of, I always say they kind of do like a reality check, right? So they said, hey, we've adopted network automation, but in reality, yes, you still have to SSH the device to do some, to kind of put on your network engineering hat, right? Because there's sometimes you need to be in the device and troubleshooting and whatnot. So it was kind of cool to see that balance
Yeah, I
between.
mean, why would you ever lock yourself out of CLI? I mean, at least console, right? Like, just ask, the people who experienced the outage at Facebook, where like automation is prevalent and the predominant way of doing things, but the poor guy who was in charge of fixing it when it gone owl, then like he still needs to go check, and then his badge expired right during COVID. So why would you ever lock yourself out of that?
Right. No, that's exactly. I think that was actually a joke that I heard in the hallway was after one of the presentations was, oh, well, yeah, you don't want to turn to Facebook, but yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
that's
you don't
just.
want to. Which we'll put that into like a term, right? You don't want to Facebook it.
Yeah, right, right. Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. You want to at least want to have the ability, right? And the whole
Yeah,
purpose is that we're saying this for people that might not really understand, like, well, why would you ever want to lock yourself out, like for real? Um,
yeah,
a lot of times you might hear in the automation, like, oh, well, when you implement automation, we can't have any sort of config drift or any like manual changes because that messes with the automation, right?
right.
Uh, and so that's what, at least what I've heard, right? Like I'm not an advocate of that. It's just, if you've ever heard that, it comes from that vein of, oh, well, if you're still allowing your engineers to manually log into the device, then what's the point of automation if they're going to mess it up and divert from the standard and so forth? But yeah.
Yeah, I think the balance that I've seen before was the fact that your manual change will get overwritten in like 2 days. So if you're like fixing a bug, and you need to hand change some stuff just to fix a bug, you better like make it permanent or semi-permanent within the next 48 hours. Otherwise, the automation tool is going to come in and say, this is not what it's supposed to be, and reverse your change.
Yeah. And I'll kind of leave with the point. I actually heard or saw that Dartmouth College,
Hmm.
they've had webinars with Netbox to explain kind of their strategy with automation, how they've adopted. It was mostly, it was Netbox focused, but what they do is they generate configs, and I believe they said every single night they do a config replace on all their devices with the generated config sourced from Netbox using the config context. And I thought that was pretty insane. Was so they basically
That's hardcore.
it is hardcore. Yeah, no, not insane is like a dumb idea or crazy.
Sure, sure,
I
sure.
think
Yeah,
it is hardcore, dude. Like
yeah,
that is I mean, every single night I'd be worried like, okay, it's almost midnight. The whole
right.
network's going to go through a config replace here. But if you're interested in that, I think there's probably a few different YouTube videos out now. Definitely recommend checking it out. If you look up like Dartmouth College Netbox, I'm sure you'll find one of the videos, and it's very interesting to see the trust in automation, and the configuration reliance there.
Yeah, and sometimes they just do it for other reasons, right? So I think my old coworker Justin Peach, he wrote from Amazon. I mean, he wrote about there was a time in place where there's significant scaling issues with load balancers. I won't mention the vendor, but he wrote it in the blog post that there are times where they just daily reboot the box, right? And so in terms of automation, manual changes, they just they're overwritten. And whenever they reboot it, they're not gonna save the running config. They're just gonna reboot it. And then once they found out that the impact is not as severe as one might inspect, then every single time they make a change, they just reboot it, right? It's not even, they write it
Oh wow.
into the running config and save it. They just like write it, run it, and then reboot it just to avoid any kind of memory leak or anything like that. Yeah, that was yeah. Anyways, yeah. So that's just a follow up on what you said. And if I look at the chat right now, and so Eddie mentioned that the network side of IT is 5 and not 10 years behind the server side, and you know, and then the network vendors haven't made their product compatible with network automation. It is true. I would definitely think that, not definitely think, but I would agree that it's less commoditized. So the server, is really a commodity, right? Like I could buy a Dell or a HP, and it doesn't impact my ability to load Linux onto either one or the flavor of Linux. But try to load Junos onto Cisco, right? Like good luck with that. And yeah, so Kaon Thana's presentation in AutoCon, yeah, so me too. I mean, I would definitely look forward to what he's done. And it sounded like he may not be the only guy, but it sounded like he is kind of the only guy who's doing it at New York Times, right? So yeah,
Yeah,
correct me if I'm wrong.
I believe he's definitely leading the charge.
Yeah.
I was able to talk to him a little bit the last night of the conference, and he said that there's definitely some people that most of the teams on board. There's a couple people stragglers that would help might need some additional help, and I think that's across the board, right? Where if you're an advocate, evangelist for network automation, you can get a couple people convinced, and then it's a process. I mean, this part of the blog that you have on screen now, the people and processes, it takes a while, and that was a theme that kind of I came away from the conference as well. Is everyone that presented that like Kaon, they explained that it's not a overnight thing. It's not a week project. It's not a hackathon project. It's not a month. This is a multi-year project. This is
Yeah, you
a
said it right here.
multi-year
Automation is a
transformation.
journey, not a race.
There you go. Yeah. So those are the my take, the wrap up to the blog. And yeah, that's exactly the theme I took away. Everyone says it, but whenever you actually hear people's journeys and their explanation of, yeah, like for example, Kaon, he told me, I believe he said they're in year 4 of this adoption. So, 4 years, and there's a lot that goes on in 4 years, and it's not just you might over that long of a time period, you might not even be trying to convince the same network team that you started with, right? Because of people,
4 years, you're like graduated from college or high school.
right? But you may be people might retire, people may leave, so like it is a journey, and it does take. Another point that I make here is it's a large process change, and it requires buy-in, and not just from the people that write the check for the tooling, but your people managers, the rest of your team, it really requires kind of everyone on board, because as soon as you have a few people that are against it, not people that just haven't picked it up, but people that might be against it, then it starts to crumble, and it crumbles pretty quickly. So it's that's kind of those were at least a couple of the themes that I took away.
Yeah, and I also want to thank you, Danny, for writing this, right? Because it's you didn't have to write it, and you didn't have to put as much thought that you would have into this for those of us who couldn't make it. And of course, sharing your take in person. So I really want to say thank you for doing this. This is well done.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
you
I'm not
know
near
me.
my recording station, but I would have given you like a applause sound, but I don't have that right now.
No, the reason I do is, you know me, I'm an advocate for network automation, and I
For
try
sure.
to, I love helping people and trying to help explain things to people. And, this is one thing that if you weren't there, I just felt that you at least need to get the messaging. And there's a lot of people that wrote blogs about kind of recapping. Like some people did like a blog on day one and blog on day two that are more detailed and have different takes. Like, one thing that I'll just say, like my blog definitely doesn't cover all the different vendors, doesn't cover, and there were plenty, right? But I didn't want to turn this thing to a book. I just picked, just handpicked a couple. But there were plenty of sponsors there that I would go into detail for, and other people that I've met. So it was a very cool experience.
No, I would say like you offer the most value from your perspective, right? If I wanted to hear from the vendor's perspective, I could just get on their website and watch videos later or whatnot. What is really valuable is from your perspective, your background, and looking through your lens. Then it puts me into your mindset and so on. So, no, definitely, pick out the ones that you see valuable, right? That in itself is valuable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. All right, cool. So we're gonna open up, maybe like the Q&A session. Feel free to just ask the question yourself, but I will go ahead and start with the first one that Keith. So Keith was there as well, and he works for Juniper. And the first question is, where are the vendors failing, in your opinion, right? That one I'm at it. Obviously he sit too close to Juniper to see out the issues. So what do you think the case is? And I'll add my piece from hearing from Damien earlier on. But go ahead.
Oh man, put me on the spot here.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. I love
Well,
kind of.
feel free to take out that soapbox.
Oh yeah, no, I like answering these sort of questions because they're the tough ones that people like to run around. Um, so where the vendors might be failing. So
Yeah.
I think the one piece, and this was a discussion point that I believe there's actually going to be an action taken with it, as well as just the different jargon used within network automation.
Okay.
All the kind of the different words that are used. So, people talk about, um, I'll use configuration as an example, right? So in Ansible, you have a concept of playbooks.
Sure.
Outside of automation and just in regular network engineering, and this may just be company lingo, but a lot of companies you work for or work with, playbooks are considered like your implementation plan, right?
Sure. Like
So
your mom.
like your mop, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've heard, yeah, mop playbook. So, but some people take that and try to move over to network automation. They hear Ansible playbook and they're like, oh, like what's that about? That's like one very simple example. Another example would be templates, right? Some
Sure.
people, what does that mean? Well, in automation, Jinja 2 templates. In network engineering, we have config templates. Config templates in network engineering are literally just text files with a couple lines of configuration on it. Jinja 2 templates, something completely separate. And that's very specific to a Python library, right? It's just that when you're talking about network automation and network engineering together, people kind of can mix lingo. Like me and you can talk about, hey, I wrote a playbook for this. Someone that doesn't have too much automation experience may say, yeah, I write playbooks all the time for our network changes. And
Right.
I might hear you and say, oh, wow, that's like, that's awesome. Like, glad you guys are adopting network automation. Well, no, no, no. I write down, we have a change template and I write down all these commands. And anyways, I think that's a super simple example and probably not the greatest, but I hope you kind of get the understanding of like, we just kind of have to outline all the jargon and all of the different wording we use within automation, and then how that kind of works with network engineering specifically. So that's one piece, I think, because a lot of times you get caught up in just word salad with some of the vendor products. But I mean, besides that, I think it's really tough to be a vendor and then also try to hold that competitive advantage with automation, because a lot of the tooling around automation is open source, right? So you could take and build on those open source products. I mean, a good example would be, Jeremy Stretch built Netbox, and now Jeremy is part of a company called Netbox Labs. That kind of builds on that and provides a productized marketing behind it.
Yep.
So there's ways to kind of market the automation tooling, but I think it's really just the takeaway from it is take a step back, try to understand what you're trying to solve, what you're trying to help, and not try to upsell some other product with it, if that makes sense, right? So
Yeah.
don't say, hey, we're selling this tooling, but it only works with our latest switching model or our latest router model or something. And it's like, okay, well, does that mean I have to buy this too? Yeah, you do. You know what I mean? Like, it just keep it open as possible. And so that way, because whenever you go into buying a product or helping a company buy a product, one of the first things you look at is what's the vendor lock-in. And
Yeah.
many times, no one's going to say, yeah, give me the one with the most vendor lock-in.
Yeah, so it's almost like the cell phone model, right? Like the cell phone's free, but then hey, if you want some plans go with it, then and by the way, it's going to be like 36 months, 3 years locked in, right? So like the software is open source, but you do have to have our latest and greatest hardware to go along with that nice, automation.
Right. And I will say this, there are times it makes sense, because maybe there's a feature or something that's just not present in older hardware,
Yeah.
right? So I know it's a balance, but I think this day and age, I would definitely try to stay as open as possible without forcing any other upsells.
Yeah, and then
Which,
this is not unique to networking, right? So there, software, there's kind of a uh what is the like end of life, end of engineering, end of like patch, right? So it's only usually like in the 3 year span. So you can't continuously support something that was 10 years ago, but at the same time you have to have some sort of public release and give people time to react and reasonable time to kind of get caught up with it, right? So it's okay if your automation tool doesn't support iOS without APIs, but you have to at least not having that refresh rate every 6 months.
right. And I guess one last takeaway, and we can we can move on if you want, is please, please, please don't put any of your product APIs behind a registration or paywall. I only ask that because, at least from my perspective, if we're looking or considering tooling, whether, for a client, you want to be able to investigate the integration points of the product and ways that you can integrate with it. Because obviously there's companies that, for example, ITSM, they may have ServiceNow, and that's staying, right? That's not going to be something that changes within the next 5 years or so. So you're going to look for products that can potentially integrate with that. Obviously, ServiceNow is a big thing that a lot of products do have out of the box integrations with, but let's say you do have to look at the bigger picture and say, well, I want to integrate with that. I want to integrate with IPAM. And so you start looking at the APIs available to see where those integration points can lie. So that's kind of where I'll leave it with.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, and sorry about that sound because I was just clicking on different links that Keith sent before, and I'll include these in our show notes for sure. On first was the Netbox Labs with the Dartmouth College that Danny mentioned before, as well as a achieving network automation with the YouTube. It's the same one. So the second question that Keith asked was, is there any value if we begin to offer some kind of suggested practice for automation, multiple ways to automate the same task?
Um, Sorry, I'm going to reread the question here.
Oh, no worries. I think what he meant was, if there's a value, if we have like kind of a cookbook or a collective best practice place to do that. Is that what you mean, Keith? I
Almost.
see you unmuted.
I don't want to call it best practice. I just want to
Sure.
call it suggestions, like to help people who are just getting started have a few ways to look at how to automate something, and then not be overly opinionated about saying do it this way, but say you could do it one of these 3 ways or one of these 4 ways, one with Ansible, one directly with Python, maybe using different modules. So the idea was, should we start that? Is there any benefit to doing that? Because something that came up at AutoCon in my conversations where people were kind of operating in a bubble. They were lone wolves getting it done, but not knowing if it's a better way to do it, if there are things they're not considering. So my thought was, should we start trying to pull that together?
Yeah, I mean, well, since I have you here, right, we'll answer that question just a little. I will let Danny answer that question just a little bit. But since we have you here, what's your overall take on the AutoCon event? Do you have anything to add to that?
My take on it was encouraging to see that many people that interested in network automation to make that trip. Come, even if it's just time away from their normal jobs, to engage and be there for those conversations. That's really encouraging. Some of the environments that I've worked in, you'll find that you're the only person that's excited about automation and what it can do. But in that environment, you were one of many people excited about what network automation can do. So that was encouraging to me anyway. I was surprised to hear how strongly the opinions for vendors being a big source of the issue. So one thing that I was honestly, but again,
did you like have some like nervous chuckle and be like, yeah, I work for Juniper too?
Well, and it was plastered over my badge. I mean, my badge, even though I wasn't there on the company's dime, it still showed me as a sponsor. So I wondered if that's why I heard it so much. But
okay. People are coming out to complain.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, but I even pinged you. I sent you a message, and I sent a few messages on LinkedIn just to ask, like, what are the vendors in general doing wrong? And I do want to know what Juniper's doing wrong along with the other vendors, so I can have a better perspective, because again, I didn't know that there was a huge problem around that. So the event was great, though. It was really encouraging, Dan. I appreciate the time that you took for the blog and going over things today. So I was just encouraged in general.
Yeah, I think that was the takeaway. One of the takeaway from Damien as well. He was telling me about the previous one that was sponsored by Network to Code, and this was like pre-COVID, so it must be 2019 or before, where they have to latch on to another conference, which was Interrupt, or I think. So it was like Interrupt, and then like a day after, or maybe like a subsession within Interrupt, and there was like 80 people who showed up. And this time, I think he mentioned there was 300 plus. So yeah, that was one of the takeaways. Oh, and something that I wanted to mention from your previous question, that where the vendors are failing. And I think and correct me if I'm wrong, you guys were both there, but I think Jeremy Schulman was actually on the stage, expressing his opinion on many of these stuff that he shouldn't be doing it by himself, right? Like there should be an open source project, like more people should participate in it, right? Like they should participate, they should open source it, and then we should all collaborate, as opposed to one or two heroes, Kirk Beyer being one, and Netbox being another, and all of that. Like they shouldn't be shouldering all the weights. Yeah, what do you think about that, Danny?
Yeah, he did mention that towards the end. I mean, that was he mentioned it in the context of I don't know what the question was, but it was related to like, well, what do you think? Like, not, it wasn't the build versus buy conversation, but it was kind of like that where it was like, well, what would you prefer? Do you like building your own tools, or what do you? And he said to the effect of, yeah, I mean, I'd like to be able to buy a tool from a vendor that kind of checks the box, and obviously that box checking is different for every organization, every person.
Right.
Um, yeah, so
I think
that
previously people were the way that some vendor have done it before was, and like the vendor you may have mentioned in your blog, may or may not mention in your blog too, that they take the biggest box checker and say, if I check box for all, like if I check all the boxes for this guy, then it should be good enough for like 99% or 90% of the other people who wants to do automation, right? So yeah, I see arguments or pros and cons from both sides.
Yeah, and just to add to that as well, so that was, I think these are two different questions that were asked whenever it was like the final panel, I believe, is when we started talking about this. The other question, which kind of relates back to what you're saying, is he basically was saying, in open source, because a lot of people were saying, hey, yeah, like, open source is great, like, keep everything open source and whatnot, and it is. But what he was saying was there's a lot more consumers than producers in open source, and
Yeah,
specifically in network automation.
for
And he
sure.
was just saying, hey, like, it was kind of a call to action to say, if you're interested in open source tooling and you like using the available open source tools, look at the list of issues, right? They're public. Look at the issues and maybe try to do something small, update documentation, fix a small bug, or you don't have to tackle like add a new feature to Netbox or anything like that, right?
Yeah.
So I just encourage people. I'll say this much because I just started getting more involved with contributing to open source within the past, I would say, year and a half.
Sure.
Just if you run into a problem and you've tried a couple different ways to solve that problem using a framework or a library, and you're like, yeah, this is weird, and I feel like other people would, it would work out for other people and help others, open up an issue, right? There are so many people that are looking to contribute, or at least some of the maintainers that are looking for just that feedback loop. Now, I would say if you open up an issue, I would say at least have a thought of whether you want to contribute or not, try to fix the problem, I guess. If it's a really big issue, obviously, I would still open up an issue, but yeah, like just be just cognizant that these are public projects, and kind of come into it knowing, hey, I want to make this project better. I use it all the time, and because at the end of the day, we're all in this together, and so we really, any way we can help each other out.
Yeah, I mean, I would roger that. I mean, I contribute to open source, I sponsor open source projects, and if everybody give Kirk a dime, if everybody who uses Kirk Byers' work, give him a dime, he probably doesn't have to work, and he could like concentrate exclusively on NetMiko or Napalm or whatever. So, but having said that, I want to say our denominator is smaller, compared to people who use Linux or people who uses Ansible, right? Like the people who does network automation or network engineering in general is smaller. So the denominator is smaller to begin with. And also this issue is not unique to network automation, like meaning open source maintainability and sustainability. There are projects like Request that's being used by millions of people and by billion-dollar Fortune 50 companies, and they contribute nothing to the project, right? So it's not unique. And something that Python, and I mentioned this in my recording with Damien as well, is that the Python Software Foundation have came up and say, okay, I'm going to be the 503 nonprofit that covers all of these. And you guys just come in under my wings. Like your PyCon meetup in Seattle, your PyData meetup in San Francisco, all just come under my wing. And so, Microsoft could write me like a $10,000 check and I distribute that to you. So you don't have to fill out the paperwork, have a board of directors and having board meetings every quarter to do that. And I think that's one way to have open source maintainability, right? Is to have something like a PSF, the Python Software Foundation, come in and overlooking all these other smaller projects. And, they've been pretty successful, right? Like, Flask was a project that was near, kind of not maintained for a couple of years, and then they took it down, and now they're, thriving, living, and all that.
Yeah, I mean, that would be great if, kind of having that, that funding and management. And like you said, it's not a problem just in network automation. I mean, the consumer versus producer ratio in open source is ridiculous across pretty much every open source project in every domain. So, but since we're already a smaller group, like you mentioned, it would be very cool to see just if network automation engineers or infrastructure automation engineers, whatever the title is in the 5-10 years, if they come in and one of the first things they learn is Git and how to contribute to open source because that's what the person before them did and has taught them, I think that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I agree. And this is a bigger topic, right? And it's just the fact that we're talking about it is an improvement in itself, other than just like, how do I write this script, or like how do I write this playbook, as you mentioned, right? Like, and very tactical stuff, right? Just the fact that we're elevating into a industry-wide thing is a giant step forward. And if I just look at the rest of the chat, I know we're almost out of time, but so AutoCon0 they're already talking about it. It's going to be in Europe in January, and I believe they have AutoCon0 scheduled or on the horizon in fall of 2024. So yeah, it's happening pretty quickly. And from Jose, it says, what I hear a lot is, what should I automate? Should I keep everything under automation? I think that's probably a bigger project. And I agree, like that's a topic that come up a lot. But as Dan was talking about on the people and process, especially like Kaon's talk and all that, is that it's a multi-year process, and probably don't want to take that SSH or console access away, and you don't want to quote unquote Facebook it.
Yeah, and just to answer Jose, that's actually one of my takes that I did mention. So I had 3 takeaways. So the one I didn't mention was start with low-hanging fruit and build on those easy wins. That was another theme that I took away from the conference. So, I mean, I think I started with talking about doing software upgrades. That's kind of, when you break it down, can be, I would say, a more intermediate problem when we're talking about difficulty, right? Because there's a lot of validation checks and you're rebooting a device. But think of the thing I always preach is think of read-only operations, right? So the one thing I always tell people is look at test automation, look at network testing. And what that means is, yes, you could look at configuration. You could do show, run, pipe, include, whatever, make sure that configuration is present. But what I really mean is doing show commands to look at operational status of your routing protocol or your layer 2 spanning tree, or looking at those sort of tables, being able to parse those tables and look for that specific value that you're expecting. Doing that in an automated fashion is a very low risk task, but you get a bunch of value out of it because you really learn how your network's operating.
Well said, Danny. I mean, I know we could probably talk on this subject for like another hour or two, but I want to respect your time, and as well as people who join today's session's time. So where can people follow you, find your work, besides this excellent DevNetDan.com blog?
Well, thank you for the promotion there. So you can find me on, I guess, it used to be called Twitter, now called X, at DevNetDan, same name. My blog, and I'm also on LinkedIn. Not on LinkedIn as DevNetDan, just my name, Daniel Wade. So yeah, but I've been promoting my content blog on LinkedIn more. And so, yeah, you can follow me, connect with me on there.
Awesome. And thank you, everybody, for joining. Let's keep in touch. My little plug is join the network automation community on members.networkautomation.community. And you'll find everybody who have contributed to today's chat, and of course Dan on the community. And thanks everybody. I'll go ahead and hang up, and everybody have a good one. Okay, automation on.